Australia is the world's largest exporter of iron ore, the second largest exporter of coal, one of the top 3 exporters of liquefied natural gas. It sits on 1.8 billion barrels of proven oil reserves and produces approximately 320,000 barrels of crude per day. It also imports 80 to 90% of its refined fuel. Both of those sentences are true at the same time. Understanding how a continent-sized energy exporter ended up structurally dependent on Asian refineries for the fuel that runs its trucks, its mining equipment, and its military aircraft is the forensic story this video traces. In March 2026, 6 tankers carrying refined products from Malaysia, Singapore, and South Korea were either cancelled or deferred. The Australian Energy Minister confirmed the deferrals publicly on March 22nd. The government released 4.8 million barrels of gasoline and diesel from its strategic reserve on March 13th. Those reserves held approximately 30 days of diesel and 30 days of jet fuel at the time of release. Japan holds over 200 days of petroleum stocks. South Korea holds over 200 days. Thailand, not a wealthy country by Australian standards, holds approximately 95 days. Australia holds the lowest petroleum stockpiles of any member of the International Energy Agency by a wide margin and has been in breach of the IEA minimum 90-day stockholding obligation every year since 2012. The question the balance sheet raises is not whether Australia has an energy security problem. The data settled that question years ago. The question is how a country with this much energy in the ground ended up in this position. And the answer is a policy decision, not a geography problem. The first thing to understand is the refinery decision. Between 2012 and 2022, 5 Australian oil refineries ceased operations. The closures were not coordinated policy. Each one was a commercial decision by a private operator responding to the same market signal. Australian refineries could not compete on margin against the large, highly complex mega refineries being built across Asia, primarily in South Korea, Singapore, and China. Asian refineries benefited from proximity to Middle Eastern crude, lower operating costs, and scale that Australian plants could not match. The economics were straightforward. The balance sheet of each individual refinery made closure the correct commercial decision. The aggregate balance sheet of Australia as a nation is a different calculation. By 2022, Australia had 2 refineries remaining, Ampol's Lytton plant in Queensland and Viva Energy's Geelong facility in Victoria. Together, at maximum capacity, they produce approximately 20% of Australia's domestic fuel demand. The remaining 80% must be imported, already refined from overseas. The government recognized this dependency late. In 2021, it established the Fuel Security Services Payment, a subsidy scheme that pays the 2 remaining refiners a production payment during loss-making periods to prevent further closures. The scheme was originally due to expire in 2027. It has since been extended to 2030. The government is effectively paying to keep 2 refineries alive to cover 20% of the country's fuel needs. The other 80% remains exposed. The second thing to understand is where that 80% actually comes from. South Korea supplies approximately a quarter of Australia's refined product imports, around 220,000 barrels per day, half of which is diesel. Singapore and South Korea together supply roughly 2/3 of Australia's gasoline imports. China has been the primary source of jet fuel. In 2026, before the disruption, China was supplying approximately 190,000 barrels per day of jet fuel to Australian aviation. Every one of those supplier countries runs its refinery operations on crude oil sourced substantially from the Middle East. South Korean refineries source the majority of their crude from Gulf producers. Singapore's refinery complex is one of the largest in the world and routes Gulf crude through the Strait of Malacca from the Persian Gulf. Chinese refineries are the most complex in Asia and hold the deepest ties to Middle Eastern crude supply. The Strait of Hormuz carries approximately 21% of global oil flows. When the strait disrupted in early March 2026, the primary immediate impact on Australia was not a direct supply cut. Australia does not import much crude directly from the Gulf. The impact was a second-order disruption. The Asian refineries that supply Australia's refined products were themselves facing feedstock pressure, and several responded by prioritizing domestic demand and imposing export restrictions on refined products destined for markets like Australia. South Korea capped refined product exports at 2025 monthly average levels. China moved to restrict fuel exports. The 6 tanker deferrals Australia experienced in March were not because the ships were blocked at Hormuz, they were because the plants that filled those ships were prioritizing their own country's fuel supply over Australia's. The third thing is the reserve problem, measured in days. The IEA requires member countries to hold a minimum of 90 days of net oil imports in strategic reserve. Australia has not met that obligation since 2012. In the period from January 2018 to January 2026, Australia's average IEA days of net import coverage was 58 days. As of late March 2026, stocks had dropped to 30 days of diesel, 30 days of jet fuel, and 39 days of gasoline. This is the lowest reserve position of any IEA member country. The comparison is pointed. The United States, which the financial press routinely describes as energy insecure, holds far more days of coverage and has a strategic petroleum reserve of approximately 370 million barrels. Australia has no strategic petroleum reserve. What it has is a minimum stockholding obligation established by the Fuel Security Act of 2021, an obligation that can be met through imported refined product rather than sovereign crude storage, which means the reserve can evaporate the moment the tankers stop arriving. The government released 4.8 million barrels from the National Reserve on March 13th. That number sounds substantial. Australia consumes approximately 1.1 million barrels of refined product per day. The release covered approximately 4 days of national consumption. The intervention was real. Its scale relative to the dependency it was managing was not. The fourth thing is what the mining sector adds to the picture. Australia's mining industry, the industry that generates the commodity export revenues that define the country's economic profile, runs almost entirely on diesel. Across the country, from iron ore operations in the Pilbara, to coal operations in Queensland and New South Wales, to gold and copper mines in Western Australia, the haulage trucks, the processing equipment, and the generators are diesel dependent at a scale that has no near-term electric alternative. Australia uses more energy from diesel alone than from electricity. That sentence appears in the Australian government's own energy security documents. When diesel supply tightens, the mining sector that generates the export revenues that fund the national balance sheet faces direct operational pressure. The irony is structural. The country's ability to export the raw commodities it is famous for depends on the imported refined fuel it has chronically failed to stockpile. The fifth thing is the policy record and what it says about the decision that was made. Australia is the only OECD country without mandatory vehicle fuel efficiency standards. Its average vehicle fuel consumption per kilometer is among the highest in the developed world. It has no electric vehicle adoption targets at the national level. The Liquid Fuel Security Review, reportedly completed in 2019, was never released publicly. For more than a decade, multiple independent reviews, IEA assessments, and parliamentary inquiries identified the same structural vulnerability, insufficient reserves, declining refining capacity, Asian refinery dependency. The government response was the Fuel Security Services payment and an extension of the minimum stockholding obligation framework. Both measures address the symptoms without changing the structural exposure. The United States has invested more money securing jet fuel storage in Australia for its own military operations. The East Arm facility near Darwin, funded at approximately $270 million, than the Australian government has invested in securing fuel supply for its own civilian population over the same period. That comparison is in the public record. The verdict is not that Australia is collapsing. Australia's mining revenues are real, its credit position is strong, and the March 2026 crisis is being managed with emergency measures that will likely prevent a hard shortage. The verdict is about trajectory. Every year, Australia does not build strategic reserves to IEA standards. Every year, it pays to keep 2 refineries, covering 20% of demand. Every year, its Asian refinery suppliers run closer to domestic prioritization. Under pressure, the structural exposure grows. The Hormuz disruption did not create this vulnerability. It made it visible. A viewer left a comment on the Hormuz video from Australia that said, "A country that is not self-sufficient is a country that will fall within weeks." The data says the timeline is longer than weeks. The data also says the direction is correct. I spent time on the IEEFA assessments, the IEA stockholding data, the oil price analysis of the March disruption, and the Australian government's own energy security documentation to build this picture. The numbers are in those documents. What is not in those documents is a policy response proportionate to what the numbers show. I have been your host on GEOLENSIAN. If this kind of analysis is useful to you, subscribe. We follow the money that the news misses every week. Until next time.